Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone's doing well. We're doing good. We've had some thunderstorms this morning and overnight, but it's starting to clear a bit now. So today I'm going to have a bit of a rant because I need to get this out of my system. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, but I'm just going to go ahead and do the video and clear it out. So I'm going to talk about the support group called Anon for families and friends of people who are dealing with addictions. So I went along to some of these groups in the past, and I'm just going to tell you my experience of it. And I thought it was absolutely a load of rubbish, and I'll get into why I thought that. So I went to Al-Anon for a very short period. That's about just as much as I was able to manage without pulling my hair out. And I realised very quickly it was a load of rubbish. And it was going to hinder my progress of healing and recovering rather than help me. Like right out of the gate, I felt that it was a really weird environment, very strange the way it was set up, the way that you were all sitting round. Everybody was given like a minute or two to talk about their situation. I don't even know how you could talk about a situation in a minute or two. And what was happening as well was you had a certain amount of time, but what you would find is that some people would go on a vent and would maybe start going for about 15 minutes and then dominating the whole time. And then by the time you got round to everybody, other people weren't getting as much time, or some people might have got missed, and there didn't seem to be anybody sort of, navigating it. So that was the first thing I didn't like. But one of the things that I noticed very quickly when I was there was there seemed to be an overwhelming push and an emphasis being placed on the addict, which is not what the group is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be support for people, a safe place for people to come, to get a relief and to get help if they're dealing with someone who's got an addiction, whether it's a partner or a family member or a friend. But they seem to be just sort of pushing the whole narrative about the addict all the time, and I didn't like that. There was a sense of trying to make you feel like you were responsible, that for somehow, because you were involved with an addict, you were a codependent. This narrative was being very heavily pushed all the time. When every single meeting I attended, they kept talking about how people who were involved with addicts, there was something wrong with them, and that's the reason why they were with an addict, which is absolutely not true. A lot of children are born into it and they don't have any choice. And I certainly wasn't a codependent person. I was always a very independent person. And just because my sister was an alcoholic did not mean that I was codependent. So I didn't like that at all. And other people in the group didn't like that. But it was being very heavily pushed. I also felt that for a group that were telling you that you could believe what you want and didn't believe what you want, took it or leave it. They seemed to be pushing a lot of stuff on you, pushing a lot of things on you to believe. Whereas then on the other hand, they were telling you to take it or leave it. So it was very contradictory, I found. They were also pushing this narrative of detaching from people who had an addiction, but staying in their lives. Now, if anyone has been involved with an addict, it is the most difficult thing in the world to detach from someone and be still in their lives. That's almost impossible because there's going to be mayhem regardless, and detaching from someone is not going to solve your problem and it's not going to solve their problems. But they seem to think that if you detached because you're so dependent, then they'll be able to get better, which is the worst load of rubbish I've ever heard in my life. And I certainly don't agree with that. And I think that's a dangerous precedent to set to people, because what it might do is force people to stay in a relationship that's harmful for them and that they don't want to. It might make them feel guilty that if they don't stay, that there's a problem. So they're pushing this narrative that you're the codependent because you're staying with them, but yet they're telling you that you should detach, but yet still stay with them. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to me. Now, another thing that I noticed quite a lot when I attended some of these meetings were people who were obviously in deep suffering. They were dealing with extreme situations in their household. They were coming to these meetings looking for support and they were overwhelmed. Their lives were in chaos, but they were trying to convince themselves that they were doing the right thing by staying. They were trying to convince themselves that if they just stay but detach, somehow their lives were going to get better. It was absolute madness. In my view, it was insanity. And, for me personally, I just wanted to stand up and say, it's okay to walk away. It's okay to leave that person. It's not your responsibility. Why are you staying with someone if you don't want to be with them? It had a kind of a cultish feel to it, I have to be honest, because even though they say that they're non-denominational, I felt that the group, and I went to several different groups because people were saying, oh, sometimes you can get a bad group. So I went to different groups to see, but I found every group to be exactly the same. I found every group to be ill-informed about the condition. I found them to be ill-informed about how to move forward. And I found them to be ill-informed about helping people navigate an incredibly destructive and difficult situation if you've got an addict in your life. And that can be incredibly harmful. And going back to my point about the non-denomination, every group I attended was heavily Catholicised. And I didn't like that either. There seemed to be a lot of Christians, and it's not that I have a problem with Christians, but because it was heavily dominated by Christians, it was a Christian narrative that was coming out all the time. Come on, you. Come on. Come, baby. Good girl. Now, the other thing that I didn't like and that I noticed was there was people attending these meetings that had been there for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, sometimes maybe even longer, and they were swearing on the Bible about how great the group was. But from what I could see from going, was they repeated the same stories over and over. And what had happened was they hadn't really moved forward in their lives. They had, in a sense, become addicted to the group because they were promoting that you're going to have lifelong friends, you'll always have support, so you need to stay in the group for a lifetime. But that's a form of addiction in my eyes. A good support group will help you and move you through the process you need to go through and then move you on. So I don't buy into the narrative of, the lifelong group bullshit, to be honest. I think that's a load of crap. And I don't think that's healthy either. And people who have been there for years should have a wealth of knowledge about addiction and help dealing with addictions for family members. But they had very little to offer. And I just think, what have they been doing for the last 30 years? There's also this very heavy aspect of having love for the alcoholic, forgiving them. Now, that maybe might come through in time, but if someone has just came out of a very toxic, maybe incredibly abusive relationship, the last thing they want to hear is how much love and forgiveness they need to give the addict. It seemed to be very heavily influenced about the addict needs and not about their needs. They should have been encouraged to take as long as they need to get to that place. If they wanted to, they should never be pressured to forgive or have love for anybody until they were absolutely ready. And that might even be never. So the other thing I didn't like was the slogans. I found the slogans to be too simplistic, too baseline, and very kind of cliche almost in a way, that they were telling people to take one of these slogans every day, buy their book, which cost actually quite a lot of money, buy their book, say the slogans every day, and you'll be all right, that'll help you. No understanding of the illness, no understanding of the disease. People just seem to be sort of drifting along in a meeting of unhealthy venting of people's lives and gossip. There was a lot of gossip in these meetings, and I didn't like that at all. That is the last thing you need, and that would make you feel very unsafe if people are gossiping in meetings. The other thing that was really weird was you weren't allowed to say addict. I thought this was very strange, and that's very cultish in its mentality. You had to say you have a qualifier or someone who qualifies, because apparently, if they don't call themselves an addict, you can't call them an addict. Well, obviously, if someone wasn't dealing with an addict, they wouldn't be at the meeting. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. And I certainly didn't call anybody a qualifier. I called the person in my life an addict because that's exactly what they were. They were addicted to alcohol. Because if they weren't addicted, I wouldn't have been there and they wouldn't be drinking anymore. And the thing is, addiction is it's a serious problem for families and friends. It is so disruptive and destructive. And I got to the point where I just couldn't justify being a part of that. I couldn't sit in that and pretend everything was okay. I didn't feel safe to be able to express my own opinions because I would have been looked down upon, that I wasn't, supportive of the addict, and I wanted to support myself and the other people that were in that room. So in the end, I decided enough was enough, and I went for therapy instead. And there's all sorts of other therapies out there. There's smart therapy, and then obviously there's psychologists and therapists who are specialised and trained in dealing with the addiction and the families. And they're very, very experienced and have extensive knowledge of the subject. and I waited for a therapist, and then I started going to therapy, and that was the change, total change for me when I went to therapy instead. But the other thing that I didn't like about Al-Anon is they have no stats. They don't keep stats. They don't do investigations. So nobody actually knows. Even though this institution's been around a long time, doesn't mean it works. Doesn't mean it's successful. Because if you don't do stats of all these groups over the years, they have no idea how many people have been through their doors, how many they've helped, how successful it's been for the addicts and for the families. They don't do anything like that, and they don't release any information to the public either. So we have absolutely no idea. And the other thing is, I think one of the reasons why it's been around so long is because it's free, and a lot of people either maybe can't afford to go to therapy or might have to wait a long time, and they can go along to this because it's free. Well, it's free in a sense. You do have to pay a donation and you do have to buy their literature. So in a sense, it's not totally free, but they advertise it as free. The other thing that I didn't like about the meetings were you were totally dependent on the person's knowledge and experience of addiction as to how that meeting evolved. So depending on how long they'd been there, depending on the knowledge they had, every single meeting was different. There was no consistency of like a person had to have a certain amount of knowledge or they had to have a certain amount of experience. When I was, one of the meetings I went to, there was a guy chairing the meeting. He was running the meeting actually. He had set it up and he had only been there for about a year. He had very little knowledge and he was still living with an addict. So I found that very odd as well. So in the end, I gave it up and I went to therapy. And when I went to the therapist, she had, she was had her expertise was in addiction help for families. And she was very, very experienced in it. And I felt safe and I felt secure, and there was absolutely no emphasis with the therapist on making you force you to stay with someone if you didn't want to stay, and all of this carry on about detaching with love and all of this. You felt safe and secure to be able to express your feelings in whatever way you wanted and whatever way you wanted to move forward. You were just totally allowed to be and feel how you wanted to feel. You know, there was none of this saying daily affirmations or slogans or any of this carry on. It was thorough expertise knowledge about addiction, how it affects the addict, how it affects you, and what you can do to heal, move forward, and process all of that information. And that is the proper way. So I'm not telling anybody not to go there, but what I would say is go to someone who knows what they're talking about, because somebody who is running a group and has been there for a year hasn't a clue what they're talking about, and they're not going to be able to help you at all. I found like every single meeting that I went to, no matter where it was, and who chaired it, I found it to be very toxic. I found that basically the meeting was not a support group. It was a venting session. It was a session where people came, they vented their frustration that they were still having to deal with addicts and they were still in their lives, but they felt like they still had to stay there, and they were venting out all of everything that had happened to them in the last week, and I found that incredibly toxic. And every time I went, I felt worse. When I left there, I did not feel supported at all. And this is incredibly unhealthy if you've got people coming there who are already in incredibly fragile states and very vulnerable and very overwhelmed by what's going on in their life, and you come into that type of environment. I think that is absolutely disgraceful. You know, and I think the inception of what Alan AA was doing in the beginning was very good. And they took a lot of stuff from Carl Jung's philosophies. But I mean, I've never went to AA, so I don't have a clue who it's helped or what the story is. But I really felt, see, Al-Anon was something that was added on later on. But I think, personally, Al-Anon is a group that was set up to give support to AA, not actually to the families. It was to keep their network of support close by to help them recover. Because a lot of addicts, sadly, won't recover without support. A lot of them won't even try without support from family and friends. And the majority of addicts that I know have lost most of their family and friends because it's too much for people to deal with. Way too much. And even if they do recover, very few of them actually build relationships again with their families. I mean, it is possible, but it is quite rare. Most people don't want to know after that. And I don't blame them because I understand. So that's my rant over about Al Anon. Maybe you've had a good experience. I'm not telling anybody not to go, but that was my experience. I found it very harmful and I found it absolutely a load of rubbish, and I certainly wouldn't go back. And I would encourage anybody to seek out a good therapist if they need help, or a good psychologist that deals with addiction, and you can't go wrong. Until next time, take care.